Okay, so welcome to another episode of Two Old Psychologists Talking About Stuff. I'm here with my good friend Ray. Hello, Ray.
Hello, Rich. Good to be with you again.
So, we're going to talk tonight about values. But before we get into that, Ray, as is customary, what's been going on since we last spoke?
Well, thrillingly, I've been watching a lot of telly. I've gone through a phase of rewatching classic BBC Dickens and Jane Austen series and stuff like that.
Life in the fast lane,
Oh,
eh?
absolutely, absolutely. It's all
It's
the
better
way.
to burn out than to fade away.
And I guess the thing I noticed is, other than, yeah, man, there used to be a real kind of industry of that. If you watch a few of these in succession, all the same actors show up. And it's just a question of, oh, who's Pam Ferris playing this time? Or who's Robert Hardy playing this time? So you can tell from those names, when I'm locating these in time, sort of 80s, 90s, early 2000s. But my reason really for mentioning it as something I'd noticed was having just finished one of them, which is like a Dickens one called Our Mutual Friend. And it's got to be said, not his finest work. It's not up there with the best of the best. Kind of realised coming to the end of it, it'd be really easy just to have hated it because the story's a bit all over the shop and there's one or two performances that aren't that great. But there's also in there some of like the best moments of all of like the Dickens stories and all of the particular TV versions with some brilliant character actors like people like Timothy Spall and Kenneth Branagh. And I just kind of noticed again, if I let myself get hooked up on what I didn't like about that particular one and how less good it was than the last one, I'd have completely missed out on these really, really pleasurable moments. So long as I could, I guess, kind of let go of the bits that you're thinking, oh no, not again. So I suppose that was my takeaway from completing the rewatch of that last night.
That puts me in mind of something that has been a bit of a topic of conversation at work recently about polarization and the kind of increasing inability of society, it seems, to see nuance. So it's kind of like that's either the greatest thing ever made or it's awful. Uh,
Yeah,
and so
yeah,
I appreciate what you're saying, which is that you can try and see it's a bit like yin and yang, isn't it? There's some kind of good in the bad and bad in the good.
yeah, absolutely. And in this case, it wasn't even particularly bits you disapprove of, just bits that were kind of clumsy or not so hot. That yeah, then you miss out on some of the really good moments. And what about yourself?
So I'm going to have a bit of a rant, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
So I very recently went to a gig. I'm still, I think, just about holding on to the idea that I don't want to go to a gig really if I've got to sit down. I want to stand up. So I like to go to gigs where I can stand up, and I kind of like to be in the thick of it. I like to be sort of down the front, near to the action. And I mean, this isn't brand new, but it just really struck me the other night. So I was there, band's about to come on, and as soon as they hit the stage, everyone's phone is up in the air. So I don't really want to look at other people's phones. Like I want to look at the band.
Yeah,
Um, so there's that. So that's number one. Is that this sort of thing of almost like nothing has value unless you've filmed it and posted it on your social media, which
yeah,
seems to be destroying people's ability just to be present and watch things with their own eyes rather than through a screen. If I wanted to watch a band through a screen, I'd stay at home and watch YouTube.
yeah, yeah. I watch it like professionally shot and beautifully orchestrated and cut. Yeah, rather than there with the raw experience of it.
So that's number one. And then number two, I found myself surrounded by, I mean, they weren't from Birmingham. They sounded a bit posh, so I can only think they were University of Birmingham students, right? Because certainly at the undergrad level, it seems like very few people from Birmingham go to the University of Birmingham. It's Freshers' Week at the University of Birmingham is like a sort of home counties zombie apocalypse with just loads of posh kids walking around, hordes of them, open mouthed. Having said that, I'm not even sure I know what the home counties are, but that they're not from round here. Let me
Not
let me
from
tell you
round
that they're
here.
not from round here, not
No,
from
no,
round these
no.
parts.
Local gigs for local people, eh?
Just talking, like talking all the way through. Like, they were talking and they were loud, and, like, you sort of understand that. People have had a drink and they're at a big social event. But I sort of think when the band comes on, just watch the band. You know,
Yeah.
stop having that conversation. Like, you could just be doing that at home. I sort of I suppose that's what my rant is. I'm struggling to understand why people go to gigs to talk to each other and look at their phones, because they could do that at home and spend a lot less money.
So it makes you wonder what they are getting that's making it worth being there and, as you say, spending the money. Must be something,
And
else people wouldn't do it.
must be something, yeah. And I do think as well, it's an opportunity for acceptance on my part, because I guess this is one of the things that happens as you get older, right? That the sort of norms of society shift somewhat, and so the
Yeah.
expectations that you have of people are often disappointed because people just do things differently nowadays. So I found myself sort of practicing acceptance, just thinking, like these younger people, probably in their 20s, grown up in an era that sort of teaches you that nothing has value unless you film it. And
Yeah.
and there's a sort of, I don't want to be too disparaging, but there's definitely a more kind of narcissistic flavour, I think, to society. I mean, like the idea of taking a photograph of yourself and putting it online. I mean, just take the first part of that. Like when I was a kid, the idea of taking a photograph of yourself, like if I'd have taken a photograph of myself, I think my friends would have beaten me up. It would just a strange thing to do. So,
Yeah,
but
I
but
mean,
that
possibly at a family gathering, if somebody had a fancy camera with a timer on it, you would sort of grudgingly accept the necessity of a family photo. But you're absolutely right. Beyond that, you wouldn't have done it. And physically, cameras weren't built for it, were they?
no,
The whole mechanism wasn't there for making that happen.
I think it was something like 2010, 11. Round about then, the iPhone 4 came out, and that was the first phone with a
Oh,
front-facing camera,
oh,
and
really?
so the social media landscape changed very dramatically at that
My
point.
goodness.
So, yeah, people just
Yeah,
more interested in their own
yeah.
reflection, their own agenda, and the idea of, I don't know, is this just a shift in values, I think, that, what's going on for me is more important than what's going on for people around me.
Yeah, okay, so there's a kinda like a it's hard not to use the word selfishness about that, as well as the thing only has significance when it's reported, and also when I'm kind of, to use the jargon, I'm situated within it. So there is a meanness about I'm somehow part of that performance. And you're not, you're a consumer of it, you're the audience. But the not just the photograph of the band, the selfie with the band stuff in the background. We may have talked about this before in one capacity or another, but it's really struck me when I was on holiday last year. I was in a sort of very beautiful place in Italy, famously beautiful, in the middle of summer, so of course it was full. I wasn't expecting it to be other than full on one of the Italian lakes. But what really struck me was the whole Instagram influencer thing. Every view of a Lake Como with the beautiful houses, the beautiful sort of trees and things behind it, everywhere you turned, there was somebody who's clearly taking photographs specifically for Instagram. And one of the ways you could tell it was typically it was young women. Often they had a kind of a guy with them who would be taking the photograph, again with a phone rather than a professional photo shoot. But the difference was they were in incredibly beautiful flowing dresses made up absolutely perfectly having the shot. And the guy was in like t-shirt flip flops. He wasn't going to be in the photograph at all. But she was posed beautifully in front of the whatever. And it evoked exactly the same feelings in me, as well as the incredible irritation of just getting along 50 yards, the lake edge became impossible without invading a dozen photo shoots. And my natural instinct has always been, oh, you don't want to get in the way of that. You step back, you wait until they've finished. Yeah, I'd still be there now. I did that. So I developed this rule that I will hesitate long enough for them to take one shot, but that's it. That's the chance gone. And then I continue along the path. So I suspect I've been in quite a few. I have photo bombed quite a few shots in Italy.
Yeah. It is an opportunity for acceptance, isn't it?
Another flipping acceptance opportunity, as you have taught me and others to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not going anywhere, is it? It's not gonna change. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. This kind of behaviour is here to stay. I noticed myself feeling a little sad about it though, because I think people's ability to just be present and enjoy something for its own sake rather than be thinking about, yeah, I need to make this look great for Instagram, or
Mm,
I need to record this so I can tell loads of other people about it. Tell you what I saw a few years ago now. Jack White, from the White Stripes. It was a solo show, and he made a plea from the stage right at the start of the show, just please everybody put your cameras away because we'd like you to just be here and
mm,
enjoy the show.
mm,
And they had employed a photographer who was just taking photographs throughout the show, and they put loads of these photos up on the website, Jack White's website, for free. He said, so if you want photos of the evening as a memento, you can have them and they'll be really good photos.
mm,
And, so you can have that and you won't have to spoil anyone else's enjoyment by having your hands in the air the whole time. It kind of brings us on to our topic of values. I think it was like, it was appealing to people's values that we'll give you the thing that you want, and can you behave differently in the
mm.
service of everybody having a better time?
Nice.
And I still have to say, by and large, it worked. Anyway, bit of work for me to do. Sounds a bit of work for you to do as well along a similar topic.
Always.
Values then. So this is something we've probably alluded to on a number of occasions in the podcast. And certainly if you come across any acceptance and commitment therapy practitioner, it's not going to be long before they start banging on about values. And I would have to say this is probably the aspect of, I'm going to call it ACT instead of acceptance and commitment
Mm,
therapy. This is the aspect of ACT that really sort of turned me on to this way of working. Because hitherto, I think my various learnings around different models of psychotherapy, they were very problem saturated. And the idea of sort of treating people almost as a diagnosis first or as a problem first, and not really, wasn't really taught to spend much time finding out from people what they cared about or what
mm,
mattered to them, or the idea of explicitly asking someone about their values, that was new to me. So that feels like it's something that really attracted me to the model. We should probably start by defining what values are. So, my tried and tested, you're at a wedding, someone asks you what you do, you say you're a psychologist.
if
Get
you're a
talking
fool,
about
say it.
ACT,
Yeah.
you mention values, before they've turned on the heel and gone off to the buffet. They say, "Oh, that's interesting. What are values then?" And you say,
I'd say values are the kind of things that you want to stand for in life. The way you want to be, the way you want to act in this world. They're the way you want to be, not just be seen, but be accurately seen, to be approaching life. Something along those lines.
"Okay, so I'm gonna try and add to that." So it's something about a kind of deeply held, it's belief or attitude towards life, something inside of you, some quality that guides your actions and decisions and are reflective of a desire rather than a demand. So
Mm.
it's funny, I often find myself when I'm talking about values, I find myself touching my chest, and I guess I'm something subconsciously, there's something I'm indicating something about my heart rather than my
Mm.
head. If like rules and expectations and demands come from your head, values is something like they come from your heart.
It's funny, that kind of heart metaphor. It's beyond the literal, isn't it? Beyond the fact that we've got this kind of muscular bag that pumps blood around that seems to be situated in the middle of our chest, but our metaphorical heart, as somehow a seat of emotion, of feeling, of in some ways of seeing it, the soul or the spirit, something around there. Yeah, and as a domain of kind of what matters to us.
If I were to ask you, give me an example of some values. So let's take it away from the abstract and just give me some examples of values. What would you say?
Well, I'll give you some of mine. wanting to act helpfully in this world, kind of be helpful, be useful, be curious, be creative, or act creatively, if we want to use an adverb rather than a verb.
Mhm. If I was to noun those, then we're talking about what? Helpfulness,
Yeah,
curiosity,
usefulness,
creativity.
yeah,
Okay. So I think, yeah, being helpful is a big one for me. Yeah, and I can tell you exactly where that comes from. I think kindness, fairness, generosity. And then I
nice.
think on a more professional level, I think education is really important to me.
Mm.
The kind of spread of ideas.
Which I guess gives us a little link to the fact that some of those values are going to be more relevant in some areas of our life than in others. There's some areas where being loving and being consistent or being spiritual, say, if that was one for some people, would be really important. But then there's others, like say work, where they may still be important, and other things like being educational, being efficient might be important.
Yeah, I think in some ways that it's a slightly fancy way of referring to something that you just don't need to be persuaded to care about. If it's just like it's intrinsically rewarding. I think it has a lot in common with that idea of intrinsic motivation. It's just sort of in you. Like I don't have to persuade my dog to eat. Like he really values eating.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same, I know, but
No,
um,
but that's right, isn't it? We don't need to be rewarded for doing those things. The doing of them is enough. We don't need to be given money or attention or affection in order to keep us doing it. We do it because even if nobody else saw us do it, we'd still want to do it because it kind of feels right, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, to my mind, this is important in ACT and in therapy more generally because for me, it provides the kind of direction of travel. If
Mm.
someone is distressed, it's only a problem because it's kind of getting in the way of them living the kind of life that they want to live. If you were distressed at the same time you got everything you wanted, you were completely satisfied, then maybe the distress wouldn't be that much of an issue. But it's usually that distress is some sort of obstruction. It prevents people contacting the reinforcers that might be available in life. If only I weren't distressed, I would be doing X, Y, and Z, that would be meeting my values of X, Y, Z.
So rather than like the currency of living well being feeling good all the time, kind of the currency is more living by these values, even though some of the time distress is going to come along. We could still be getting some of what we want out of life rather than just trying to eliminate the distress.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've said it so many times to people that it's almost become a cliche in my own head, but that idea that some things are worth suffering for, it feels really important. It's not about eliminating distress. It is about trying to find meaning. That feels like the most important thing in therapy, trying to find a life that's characterized by you enacting qualities that give your life meaning and purpose. And sometimes that means that you are going to feel some distress because you can't care about something and expect that to be completely kind of rent free.
Yeah, there's a price tag to it. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't have a loving relationship, for example, without, I don't know, maybe aspects of jealousy or threat or irritation at some things that your loved one does. You can't have success without some degree of concern about failure. The kind
yeah.
of like, two sides of the same coin.
I mean, it was interesting, Rich, that you said, this was one of the aspects of this psychological approach that grabbed you early. And I would absolutely echo that. Kind of from my experience, one of the things I've been struggling with in my practice, largely working with people with advanced illness, people facing their own death or the death of someone they love. One of them is the biggest like meaning stuff, and what's life for when things are definitely going really badly. And one of the things that I find useful about thinking in terms of values is exactly what you're just saying. The ability to say that caring for somebody you love who is very ill is going to be tiring, it's going to be stressful, it's going to be worrying, there will be tears. And having those things in the pursuit of being loving and supportive to this person in their kind of like darkest time makes a different kind of sense of those feelings. People may still need some help in how to cope with the extent and the overwhelm of them, but actually understanding that's a price I am willing to pay to be loving and supportive in this situation is very different from the societal message that if you're feeling bad, something must be wrong, and we must switch that frown around and get you happy again before you can go ahead and do anything important. It's very much the opposite of that. We move forward and do the important stuff, even whilst carrying our suffering with us.
Look, I think I've probably had clients who have, at the end of what perhaps they would see as a successful period of therapy with me, they've not necessarily gone away experiencing less discomfort or anxiety or whatever it is. So, in one sense, one might look at that and think, oh, well, you didn't do a very good job. At the same time, as perhaps not having reduced their discomfort, they have massively expanded their sort of repertoire of behavior, and they're going out into the world and they're living a much bigger, more meaningful life. And as a consequence, they're getting outside of their comfort zone more often. So, guess what? When you get outside of your comfort zone, you experience discomfort. It's kind of why they call it a comfort zone. But to me, I don't see my job as being reduction of distress. I see my job as being sort of expansion of life. It's leading a bigger, richer, more fulfilling life. And if or discomfort is a part of that, then so be it. And I honestly don't really know of a way of living a sort of full, rich, meaningful life without experiencing some kind of discomfort,
Mm,
which sort of leads me to what I think has almost become my favourite line I've ever learned in psychology, which is that in your pain you find your values, and in your values you find your pain. We hurt and care about the same thing,
mm.
kind of poured from the same cup.
So, what would be a good example of that? Inside your pain, you find your values.
There's big ones, and we talked about this before when we did the episode on death. The idea of like grief being the price that you pay for love. I think you can't get bigger than that. But I think an example I often give to clients, because I'm often reaching for things that are relatively benign and not too much self-disclosure on my part. But so something like getting anxious about teaching a group of people that I've never met.
Mm,
I notice that very palpably. Like if I'm giving a conference presentation or something, I often don't sleep very well the night before. I get up and I'm a bit fidgety, and
mm,
I'll faff around with the slides, and I'll get there early to check out the environment I'm going to be teaching in, all of that stuff, and that is anxiety.
yeah.
It's me feeling uncomfortable because it's sort of nerve wracking doing this thing, but at the same time, I really enjoy doing it, and I think there's a lot of value and meaning for me in doing those kinds of things. And I think I've come to a point where I sort of would miss it if it wasn't there. Like if the anxiety didn't show up, I'd start to
Mm.
think, you've lost it. You should probably go and get another job. You've stopped caring about this. You've stopped caring enough about it.
Right. So at that moment when you're kind of like half an hour before doing a presentation, and I've actually been with you like shortly before presentation, and yeah, you clearly are in some kind of a zone. Then you're focused on that, and we're not going to make sort of small talk at that moment. So you're clearly on it, sort of in your head. In that time before doing the presentation, you've already said you got a value about educating and spreading the word. But what else is it about how you're going to do it or what you might achieve if it goes well that makes it important enough to kind of almost like justify the anxiety?
Well, I think you could almost define what that is by thinking about what sort of person would I be if I didn't have any anxiety.
Oh,
Let's say I've been booked to do a teaching event And so I turn up, and in my head, I've got, well, I don't know any of these people. I probably won't ever see any of them again. I've been paid. I don't really care whether they learn anything or not.
Yeah.
I've got this old PowerPoint, been using this for 20 years. It's done me all right. I'm sure this will be fine. And I just went in with that kind of attitude. I don't think I'd have any anxiety whatsoever.
Mm.
Because it doesn't mean anything. There's absolutely nothing riding on it. So I think if I sort of flip that around, I think what is riding on it is that it genuinely matters to me that these people have a day well spent where they go away thinking that was worth attending. That was good. I've got something out of that. I've got something that I can take away and use. So it is that education piece. Like I like the sort of separation. Like I might be teaching, but if people aren't learning, then I'm not really teaching, am I? I'm just standing up
Yeah.
talking. And
Yeah.
I'm sure we've both been to presentations in the past where you think this guy's just phoning it in, like
Yeah.
he doesn't care about
Oh, yeah.
what he's doing. And so, I would absolutely hate to be thought of in those terms.
So being
I'd rather someone hated it but thought he's at least he's passionate, he cares about it.
so the worst thing about somebody afterwards, like say you're in the loos and you hear two people talking about the presentation, they're not aware that you're there, and one of them says something like, "Oh God, he was terrible." I didn't get anything out of that. It sounds like that would actually hurt.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, or like, "That was boring. What a
Yeah.
waste of time."
So there's something in your pain there that does clue us into some of your values in exactly that way we were talking about before. It's one way of getting in touch with it, isn't it? Kind of new therapists who are kind of like in training will often ask. In fact, a group asked me just this morning, kind of what are the best ways into finding out people's values, and we might talk about a few of those exercises later in this conversation. But one of the absolute best ways is if you observe something kind of hurts a person, not something you've done necessarily, but they're talking about something that hurts, and not just superficially peed them off a bit, but kind of like pierce them to the heart, and you see their shoulders drop, and you see a little moistening of the eyes. If you gently and respectfully begin to follow that thread, you may well find your way through to an idea like being helpful, being useful really matters to that person. And because you've seen that show up in real emotion, we're much more confident that we are seeing the real deal than somebody's just saying the thing think they ought to say and giving the answer to what are your values of what are the top 5 virtues that I'm meant to salute, because we've actually seen the real thing show up.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, that's happened a lot, I think, in the sessions that I've been part of where a client becomes tearful, for example, and, yeah, my response might be something like, "Wow, something's really touched you there," or, "I wonder what it is that matters to you this much that it would bring you to tears."
And the opposite, of course, that if you're opposite somebody and you see them light up, and you hear a lightness in their speech, the shoulders go up a bit more, there's more animation, their voice goes up and down a bit more, particularly in, say, a depressed client, that actually doing the same thing, I wonder what it is about what you were just talking about that mattered so much to you. We can follow that thread, and maybe we're going to get something useful in the values domain then.
Completely. Yeah, it can go both ways, can't it? And, yeah, sort of seeing the passion being ignited in somebody can point you to their values. I feel like there's one or two kind of definitional things we probably need to address because I think people struggle sometimes with the difference between values and goals. If you ask somebody, like I think it's a clumsy way to go about it, like just say, "What are your values?" Like, I think rarely do you get a very informed answer by doing that, but
Well, and why would you? Because the word values is already occupied. We have social values, political values, religious values, and they're talking about something slightly different than we are. So, yeah,
yeah.
just asking the people the question, why would they conceptualize that word in the way that we want them to?
And also that you raise an interesting point there. I think that the word itself has become a little bit hijacked by sort of corporate values. I think corporations and organizations, it's flavor of the month, isn't it, to have, our corporate values and they're on they're on a poster in the foyer, and everybody's got to recite them at their personal review, and it sort of becomes a bit of a aversive word. So yeah, I think I'd probably steer clear of it unless we've clearly established what we're talking about. So yeah, so values and goals. Then I think it's often people, we're in values territory and they start to talk about things they want to do. I think the difference for me is that goals aren't really a very mindful concept. You know, they're either in front of you or behind you, and values to me feel like there's something that's ever present. I suppose the little example I often give, and it's a silly one, but maybe sometimes that's helpful, is if I had a value of heading west, like I just wanted to be remembered as the guy that went west, I could go like from Birmingham, you know, I could go to Tipton or Dudley or Wolverhampton. I don't know why you're laughing. Shrewsbury, Aberystwyth,
Aberystwyth next, definitely.
you know, Anglesey, New York, California,
Yeah.
Japan, Russia, Romania, Liechtenstein, France, Kent, and I could just keep going. And each one of those moves would be a sort of westerly step, but I'm never going to get
Mm.
to west because it's not a place.
Mm.
It's so I think the idea of values being more like the direction than the destination. So
Nice.
if you have a value of, we both identified the value of being helpful, there's lots of things you can do. If being helpful is your direction, there's lots of destinations on the way. You know, and you could qualify as a psychologist, you could be a therapist, you could start a podcast. But there's also things you could do on the evening or on the weekend or after you've retired. You're never going to get to helpful and go, right, that's it, I've done that now. It's not a destination. There's destinations on the way, but being helpful itself is a direction that you probably never, and you're never gonna arrive there because it's not a place.
Yeah, it's never done, is it? It's never
Yeah.
done. You know, we might need to work at finding different ways of being helpful if working a particular job was your main way of expressing helpful, and that job comes to an end, people may spontaneously find other ways of being helpful. People do it every day. However, sometimes people are going to struggle a bit, particularly if they've not really got any idea of why it is they found that the right job for them. You know, when that job comes to an end, they might just become stationary. And understanding what it was about that job, you know, so that retrospectively, what was the most important thing about being a psychologist, being a teacher, being a whatever, and finding out that being helpful was a core part of it, that can then be like the active ingredient for saying, okay, so what other ways might we be able to find of being helpful? Even if the shape of that behavior, the thing you're doing moment to moment, is quite different, it kind of serves the same value.
I think that's a really useful concept. You know, that idea of once you have an idea of what the value is, you've got lots of options on how that might be manifest. I think this must be really relevant, particularly in your work. You know, having worked with a number of people with physical injuries or disabilities, where the injury has stopped them from doing a particular thing, like let's say doing a sport, for example. So they can't do that sport again. That's kind of off the table. Yet, if you can find out, well, what was it about that gave that activity meaning? It may be that you can find some other activity that has a similar function, even though it might in some ways be a bit of a pale imitation of the thing they really would like to do. It still gives them some sense of pursuing the same kind of direction.
Yeah. So getting some of that same reinforcement and some of that same fulfillment. I think it's very important at those moments that we also make room for grief and say, it really sucks that I can't play football anymore. And I'm allowed to be really sad about that, whilst also finding new ways of doing something that's kind of active outdoors and with a group of other people. Maybe those were kind of like some of the active ingredients, values driven active ingredients. And I can find other ways of doing that. And it's still okay to really miss the football.
One more differentiation I think we should probably just make is between values and rules,
Yeah.
because often when we get into values territory, I find people have taken a value and they've sort of gripped it so tight that they've turned it into a rule that ends up
Mm.
being counterproductive. It's kinda like the difference between valuing kindness and saying to yourself, "I must always put other people first." Valuing kindness has a sort of flexible quality to it, whereas "I must always put other people first" feels like it's quite inflexible, and there might come situations where if you hold that rule too tightly, it's gonna come back and bite you.
And I think in people coming to recognize, maybe they're always putting other people first. I think sometimes what's tricky about beginning to engage with that is people quite reasonably say, but kindness is one of my core values. It's who I am. I can't change that. It's who I am, therefore I can't change it. And what you're picking up, which absolutely is that, well, actually what we're picking up here is a rule about behavior, about how you enact that value. Like, our values don't have an existence really separate to the behaviors that embody them. We can build the most advanced brain scanner in the world. You're never going to find a value in a person's head. They only really exist in the action of doing things that are compatible with that value and the reinforcement that brings to people. It's very useful to be able to sort of pin down values and get words for them, but the value isn't in the word. You can recognize that kindness, helpfulness, say, are your core values. I'm using the word core value very, very loosely there. I'm not meaning that's a separate class of values, but are important values to you. Having them in a plaque in your kitchen, beautiful calligraphy with a nice little frame from Etsy saying, be kind, be helpful. That might be a useful environmental prompt to remind you of what's important to you, but that sign isn't your values. Having it as a tattoo isn't a value. The actions that embody that, yeah, that's when we're really in contact with the values.
Would you be up for doing a very quick experiential exercise?
Oh, always.
You got a pen?
I have.
So, I just want you to sign your name as you ordinarily would. If I could just ask you to reflect on that, if, on a sort of 0 to 10 scale, 0 being like you held the pen so lightly that it just fell out of your hand, and 10 that you were like, kind of grip this thing for grim death. What would you say the amount of pressure was that you applied to the pen?
About a 3.
Okay. So now I'd like you to do 10. Right, I want you to tense your entire arm, grip the pen like you were hanging onto a precipice, and, yeah, sign your name
Ooh,
again.
this can play havoc with my de Quervain's tendinopathy, but here we go. Okay, that looks nothing like my signature.
Okay. So, yeah, so we'll come back to what you've produced in a minute, but what was the experience like?
Well, it was odd. I was completely focused on the pen, and and on, is this going to hurt my thumb? And not at all really on the signature.
Okay. It interrupted your ability to be kind of present with the task.
Well, yeah,
And if we come to what you actually produced, so it looks nothing like your signature.
really doesn't.
The punchline here really is that values are kind of like the pen. Hold them lightly. The more rigidly you hold on to them, it's likely that your pursuit of them is going to be less engaging or enjoyable, and the end result is probably not going to be quite what you were after.
Neat.
In terms of sort of accessing values, any kind of textbook or self-help book is going to be chock full of options for doing this.
Mm,
From simple things like looking down lists of values and underlining the things that seem like they stand out to you,
mm.
or values card sorts. They're another sort
Yeah,
of therapist favorite, aren't they, in terms of having cards with values printed on, and then you sort them out into piles of things that you think are important or not important. There are perspective taking exercises like sort of writing yourself a letter back from your 80th birthday, and what would that older, wiser version of you tell you about what really matters. Do you have any particular kind of favorites? Do you think there's a something that you come back to time and again as being a useful way of keying into your values that would be useful for listeners to hear?
I mean, one of the absolute classics, one of the early ones, which is slightly linked to the letter you were talking about, though it doesn't suit absolutely everybody, is the funeral address. to put it briefly, in most cultures, at a person's funeral, somebody is going to say nice things about the person who's died. And so the invitation is that a person thinks forward to their own funeral and somehow they're able to witness it. And somebody stands up to give the eulogy, we call it in our culture, I guess. And if they stood up and said, okay, just in case you didn't know him all that well, the thing you've got to know about Rich is he was always a very blank person. And the question is, what would you like the person to be able to truthfully say in that blank? So if that were you, Rich, I mean, what one or two words would you put in that little blank space?
It's interesting because I feel like I could overthink this. The word that came up when you asked me was kind.
There we go. So that's a kind of a perfect example, isn't it? If you want something to be a part of, it's not ever going to be about just one thing, but a part of what your life ended up being about, then that is a way of getting it. It's not so much about the social approval of it and somebody having noticed it. It's about a word that says something about how you lived your life. And the invitation then, of course, is, and we're still here today. It's not too late. Even if circumstances have made it difficult for you always to live your life that way, maybe between now and whenever that day does come, kindness is part of what you can more consciously bring into your choices about daily what you do. That's one I particularly like. Not everybody wants to be kind of going to the concept of their own death. So that's why we can do like 80th birthday, or even something like somebody writes a little profile for a newspaper, or these days, I guess, a web page, saying, yeah, the thing about this guy is he is really ... So I guess those are little sort of metaphor come exercises that they can only pluck out one or two ideas, but they can really key you into important ones and give good examples.
I like the simplicity of that. There's a real elegance to it, but quite a depth as well. It's weird. I noticed myself feeling quite emotional
Yeah.
when the kindness word came up because I don't think had you prepared me for that and said, "Oh, we're going to do this," and then I'd got into a big sort of analysis of it, I think I would have arrived somewhere different. But the fact that you kind of sprang it on me and then I just went with whatever my mind threw at me, yeah, there was something quite moving about that.
And again, doesn't that just tell us that there's truth there?
Mm,
It wasn't just a clever and or use or not even just clever, because that's kind of dismissive, but a useful answer in this context of us having a conversation within a podcast. But there was actually something kind of really true about who you want to be in the world, because else there wouldn't have been that little upswelling of emotion that went with it.
sure. I think there's various different ones I use. Some are more kind of involved and would probably take too long to describe here. But there's one that I think, again, is quite quick and portable. I'm going to invite you to do it rather than just me talk about it, if that's okay.
Absolutely, as ever, up for anything within
Have you
reason.
got your phone handy?
I do.
Of course you do. It's
Super.
2025 and everybody's phone is within a couple of feet of
Or else the
them.
anxiety begins to build up, doesn't it?
Where's my phone?
It's the Bowlby attachment model. The idea that all, certainly mammals and most creatures, have a constant map of where their most significant other is. And I think increasingly, the most significant other for a lot of people is their phone. So I know where it is.
So would you go to the camera roll on your phone? So
Camera
wherever
roll.
you've got your photograph stored,
Photos. Yeah. Okay.
and I want you to just like whiz it, scroll, 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 scroll,
Fling, fling,
scroll,
fling.
and then stop.
Yep.
And so I don't know how many photos are on the screen there, but just I want you to just pick one that kind of jumps out at you
Yep.
and grabs your attention.
Okay. I see it.
Um, and I want you to just do a bit of kind of mental play with it. So I want you to imagine that, like, if it's outside, imagine it was inside, or if it was taken in summer, imagine it was taken in winter,
Hmm.
or if there's somebody in the photograph, swap them out, put someone else in. So in this sort of mental substitution game here, there's going to be something that you think, well, I can't take that out, or I can't change that aspect because if I did, then I would never have picked this photograph in the first place.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
It absolutely does.
And so my question to you then is, why is it important for you to not take that ingredient out? What does that ingredient tell you about what matters in terms of this photograph? And could you give that to me in one word
One word tricky.
or a couple of words? Don't have to be too
Okay,
rigid about
okay, okay. So inclusion within a family, not inclusion in a kind of formal political sense, but people being part of a family group and welcomed in.
it. Okay. And I'm gonna sort of do a part 2 to this exercise, if that's okay, because
Mhm.
I think, one thing we definitely need to talk about is that values on their own, in isolation, it's kinda like, what's the point, right? I might have a value around the environment, but if I'm not buying a bamboo toothbrush and doing my recycling, it's sort of like, there's not not a lot of point in having the value. So I think in ACT, we would always be looking to pair values with action. And you don't have to tell me this if you don't feel comfortable to, but I'd just invite you to think, if you could do something this week that was consistent with that idea of inclusion within a family, do you have any idea of what it could be? Could you set yourself we're to get back to goals here. Set yourself a goal, like a little
Mm,
target. It
mm.
doesn't You don't have to be setting the world on fire, but it's just do one thing that would bring you a little closer to that sense of, inclusion that you've just spoken about.
There would be something as simple as sending a message to a specific person who isn't part of my absolutely kind of everyday in front of me. And yet I would want to feel welcome and a part and might be able to do that just by a kind of like simple, friendly reaching out message.
Great. I guess the data we have in ACT does tell us something about the goal here, which is to increase the amount of time that people spend engaging in value-driven activity, because it seems that engaging in behavior that's driven by your values as opposed to being driven by a bunch of rules or shoulds or expectations, that tends to be associated with a greater sense of
Mm,
psychological flexibility and well-being. So it doesn't matter, does it, that it's not enormous? A simple text message to reach out to someone that's welcoming and tells them, "Hey, you're included."
mm. Yeah, it's that feeling that it's not, we don't measure this stuff by how many minutes or hours of your time it takes up or by the pound or by the foot. It's kind of just a thing which has this element present is of value.
And you don't have to film yourself doing that, put it on Instagram. It has
Yeah,
some intrinsic value whether
yeah,
you
yeah.
publicize it or not, right?
Well, yeah, and that's almost the test, isn't it? Okay, in this case, the other person would have to be aware, else it wouldn't really have happened. But generally speaking, would you still do it if nobody was aware? If you didn't get an Instagram post with 50 likes
Mm.
for what a great person you are for having done this.
Thank you for doing that, Ray. Appreciate your
Mm.
willingness to take part there. What would you want people to take away from this discussion?
I think one of the things I'd want people to take away is that values, in the sense of what we're talking about here, aren't somehow mysterious or abstract or handed down to us, but they are something that's just part of the thread of what we do and why we do it. And because of that, when we are facing something difficult, whether we talk about you before a sort of big presentation, or we're talking about somebody having to, look after somebody they love who's poorly or something like that. One of the questions I think that can really help us in preparing for our difficult thing ahead is to ask ourselves the question, why does this matter to me? Not in a dismissive way of shouldn't, but no, it clearly does matter to me. So what is it about it that matters to me? How does this touch on my values? Because that can then be the gateway to sort of the acceptance of I'm willing to have this difficulty if that's what it takes to do this valued thing. So seeing values as something we're not necessarily thinking about 24 hours a day, but at times we can look at what matters about this thing, and that can help us move towards it even when the going's tough at times.
Feel like there's not much I can add to that. Although maybe just on the action side, the one thing I perhaps would encourage people to take away is that it really doesn't have to be big. One thing I'm often asking clients is, like, what's the smallest meaningful step you could take in this valued direction between, now and next week? So
Mm,
just something that would be meaningful. It would mean that you could look back and you think, "Yeah, I had a bit more of this value guiding my actions this week than I did last week," but it really doesn't have to be big. Let's set ourselves targets that are, realistic, achievable, and small doesn't have any less kind of worth than
yeah,
some grand gesture.
nice.
Okay, well, that's probably enough of us being all nice and friendly and warm, isn't it? I'm going to ask you a question, which is going to elicit sort of something completely in the other direction. If you're ready for that,
Oh, good.
Let's go and ask Ray, shall we?
what is your least favourite word or phrase?
Your call is important to us.
Oh,
Well, I mean, what's it evoke for you when I say that?
I'm just angry straight away. The most insincere thing in the world, that isn't it?
Yeah.
But
We are experiencing a particularly high level of calls, which we have been every day for the last 2 years because we haven't chosen to employ enough staff to offer a competent level of service. Your
because
call
your
is
call
important.
isn't important enough.
Well, somebody once said it's like a no exit sign. Nobody ever puts a no exit sign in the middle of a blank wall where there is no exit. People only ever put a no exit sign somewhere there actually there is an exit, but for some probably very good reason they're trying to show you away from. So your call is important to us. You wouldn't need to say that if they were acting like it was important. And breathe.
Yeah, it's a methinks thou dost protest too much moment, isn't it? Yeah, is it that important? Mine is along similar lines. Unexpected item in the bagging area. That thing that those machines, those automatic checkouts
Mm.
say when you've put a packet of coriander in or something, and you think, What? Why is this unexpected? I've scanned it. I've put it where it's supposed to go. I'm not sure what you're surprised about. Often, though, it's you haven't even put the coriander in, it's you've just touched the bag. So you've exerted some sort of downward force on that sensitive plate at the bottom, and it thinks you've put something in.
Or, it encourages you to bring your own bag, but then it somehow can't cope with the fact that you have put your bag in the bagging area. Strangely enough, the bag weighs something and it can't cope.
I
Modern world, eh?
honestly, those things are, I mean, you're probably getting a sense I can I have a lot of opportunities to develop my acceptance that I'm still working on. But those things are the bane of my life. I'd rather stand in a large queue than use one of those things because I feel like I'm cursed. I only have to breathe too heavily and the red light
Mm,
comes on, and I get the "An attendant will be with you shortly" message, and I've been completely prevented from proceeding with my shopping.
yeah, and shortly is then sometimes a relative word. I also, was also kind of slightly, kind of morally, I think checkout jobs are not necessarily the most rewarding ones in the world, and they're steady in employment. And as somebody said, when we were growing up, and people say one day robots will take your jobs. You got these images of these sort of Doctor Who-ish kind of robots taking over everything, and actually, well, turns out no, it's marginally more profitable for the supermarket to make you do all this interaction with a machine, and then they employ less staff. And that was the robots taking our job all along. It's just robots that don't work very well.
Well, on that dystopian vision that's already amongst us, I think we should call it a day.
Yeah, I'm going
Um,
to go and watch a costume drama and cheer myself up.
yeah, you do that. Okay, mate. Thanks very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure as always, and I will see you next month.
See you soon. Bye.